Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Keith Klein. I am the founder of VentureFizz. If you've never heard of VentureFizz, we are a website that is really a community hub focused on the tech industry. So we support Boston, New York. It's a place where you can go to find jobs. We have a lot of content that we create that showcases companies and what it's like to work there. So a lot of videos. So we do a lot to support the ecosystem. And our world is a lot of like software, of course, AI, robotics, but not heavy in the more hard tech side. So I am just as excited to spend time learning today from our three panelists that are going to talk about careers in tough tech. When I look at the funding announcements out there, especially if I look at Boston, there is a ton of capital going towards tough tech companies. So that just always draws me in to say, wait, there's a lot of opportunity here. There's companies that are hiring, they're growing. So what's the career path for people to actually land in one of these companies? If you don't have that traditional background that perhaps one would think would be a fit. So, anyways, we're going to dissect lots of details today to help you on your path and journey into a tough tech company. Now, we are doing this event in correlation with the Engine, which is an amazing, I guess I call it a firm because it's a VC, but also they have like an incubator, accelerator. Like Lexi, you probably know better of like they have a whole area where there's just lots of hard clean tech companies that are working on really cool stuff, but they're not funded by the Engine Ventures. So there's two sides to their world, but they are super supportive. And they had this whole tough tech week they've been putting on. So this is happening this week. There's been events going on in Boston and online events. So there's been so much good stuff going on. So, anyways, let's get started here. So I want to have each of the panelists walk through the details of your background and kind of your world in this tough tech climate. So Lexi, let's start with you. Talk about your background.
Sure, yeah. Thank you, Keith. Hi, everybody. I'm Lexi. I have been an HR team of one since I started my career back in 2016. And I was in sort of the software world up until about 2022 when I joined a biotech startup that was funded by and resided in the Engine. They're called Kitapin. They're still in the Engine. They're awesome. So I sort of dove into the tough tech scene pretty hard in 2022. Being located in the Engine is really great because you also get access to all these other like really smart people and leaders and companies and that are doing really cool things. So I not only was working in at Kitapin as their first and only HR person, but also was consulting for some of the CEOs in the Engine ecosystem as they were sort of getting ready to bring on maybe their first team member or scale a little bit after Series A or something like that. I left Kitapin at the beginning of this year, and right now I am consulting, an HR consultant at InSource Services. We're a local business operations consulting firm based in Wellesley. And I still have a few what I would consider tough tech companies on my client list, doing anywhere from like climate tech to advanced materials like quantum and those types of things, biotech, et cetera.
Here's a fun fact about Lexi and I. We go way back. So VentureFizz supported Cambridge Semantics, which that was like an early data heavy like
Yeah,
machine
big data
big
visualization, I
data
think. Yeah.
visualization. Yeah, like early to the market.
Yeah.
Great company. And I failed to mention something before I went into the intros. I have the chat function open. So if you have questions, you can put them just in the chat. There is a Q&A part of Zoom that we can save questions towards the end. But I'm a fan of if you have questions, please add them to the chat and I'll try to work them into the discussion that way instead. So, all right, Chris, you're next.
All right, Keith, thanks for having us, and it's great to be here. I'm Chris Berkner. I'm the founder and CEO of Berkner Group. So we're a executive search firm. We also do technical search in the sort of tough tech arena, which really encompasses a lot of different verticals, some of which are more or less related. But we're talking about, climate tech like green steel and green cement, and grid tech, energy storage, next generation solar, next generation building materials. Um, and so these kinds of things, this is what we do. We're a firm of about 35 people, and we're mostly focused on, kind of C-level and VP roles for startups. in the US and Canada. We also have a technical search group, so we know a lot about placing engineers and scientists as well. That's about a third of what we do. And my own background is kind of circuitous, at a circuitous career path. I actually started out in software, but realized, and I had an econ degree. I realized my passion is green tech, doing something for the planet. So I went back to school for a second bachelor's, thinking I'd become kind of an eco inventor, PhD type person. And I was doing chemical engineering at Berkeley, and I dropped out to start a venture capital firm. It was kind of an unusual situation where I had an opportunity to jump in and get involved sooner than I thought in 2007. So I did a VC stint for a few years in climate tech. One of our portfolio companies was an ag bio, organic biopesticide company called Marone Bio that went public on NASDAQ. And there's another company called PureSense that needed a lot of help. And the company asked us to find them a CEO. We hired a search firm. Search firm didn't find anyone we liked. And my partner said, you go run it. So I was a turnaround CEO at an ag tech startup, hardware software startup, helping large farms manage their irrigation and energy for about 3 years. So I did a lot of, actual operating and growing and hiring in the space. And I just never found a search firm that I loved. So I started my own. So that was about 13 years ago. So that's kind of how I got here. And been working with the engine since about, I think, 2018, 2019. And I'm officially the CXO at the Engine Accelerator, and also work with a lot of the Engine Ventures portfolio companies.
Well, just being in the search industry, when you partner with somebody with the operating experience that you have, Chris, that is next level service. Like, because you don't just kind of like, yeah, I kind of understand. No, I've lived in this role before. I've done this. I've scaled this. I've built this. I've invested in this. You've done all pieces of the equation. So that's impressive.
Yeah, thanks. It can be a double-edged sword because I can have very strong opinions about what decisions should be made, et cetera. So I try to just be supportive and let them
Right.
make a call. Give them lots of great options.
How about you, Alec?
Yeah, so my background kind of comes from the finance side of things. So started my career in investment banking about 10 years ago. Went from that into venture capital, helped start a fund focused on real estate tech. So not particularly tough tech. A lot of kind of proven technology and in other industries getting applied to real estate, which as some of you may know is tends to be fairly antiquated in terms of technology. Did that for about 5 years and switched into an industry I'm far more passionate about, which is climate, and quickly realized climate tech is quite a bit of tough tech. There's a lot of hardware, there's a lot of science and technology risk, outpacing execution risk. I started an angel syndicate called Sun Road Syndicate. We invest in seed and pre-seed companies, B2B, industrial decarbonization, clean energy, both hardware and software. Realized in the first few years of running that syndicate that that there's a real gap in terms of technical expertise, and founders want to work with investors who understand their technology, who aren't just writing a check. And so I went back to school, went and took a whole bunch of engineering classes at Columbia in their sustainability science and earth and environmental engineering departments to try and get smart on some of the technology side of things, the engineering side of things. So have not finished that program, but was convinced by a portfolio company to jump in and run finance and operations. And so that's where I am now. The company's called Charge Robotics. And we manufacture large-scale robotic systems that we deploy way out in the middle of nowhere in the desert to do the mechanical assembly of utility-scale solar farms. Advanced robotics.
Wait. Break
Yeah.
that down. Like
Yes.
what? What?
Yeah, sorry. So there's a couple other companies that are similar, doing kind of pieces of automating the solar construction process. And so we basically have a big mobile assembly line and some semi-autonomous delivery vehicles that, the assembly line assembles bays of solar panels and all the hardware that they're mounted on, and the delivery vehicles take them out into the field and mount them on piles, and operate that around the clock for a few months, and you have a couple hundred megawatts of solar built. So very difficult, but in this building are some extremely smart engineers. And as the non-engineer, I feel lucky to be here and working on really cool problems. So happy to have pivoted into a situation where I'm out of my depth, but somebody's got to run the spreadsheets.
True.
So
And
yeah,
I
because
just
you're
can I just
okay,
point
Chris.
out, this is a great example of a unique career path where Alec was a very successful VC, but he wanted to get into a specific sector, green tech, and so he started his own small investment fund, making pre-seed investments. Um, and then one of those companies saw how great he was and said, "Come on board," right? So that's one way to go. If you're a VC and you're not in clean tech or deep tech or et cetera, if you can afford to spend a year or two of your life, running a small, pre-seed fund or that's one way to get in. So
And okay, now I'm just gonna go off script here. Uh, like I think of Jason Jacobs, right? My Climate Journey, like
Hmm.
what he did. So I know him as Runkeeper. I still use Runkeeper for
Yeah.
running, and it was a very early to market iPhone app, and now he's like the guru of all climate tech. But he started out doing some investing, but running a podcast, and became this media juggernaut in that space. So there's
right.
so many different ways to get there that we're gonna hopefully break through. But when I hear what your company's working on, Alec, I'm just like, wow, like there's so many things going on that you don't even dream about. And the use of autonomous systems to do what you're doing is just so unique. I never even would have thought of that, but there's a company that we've been working with recently called Blue Water Autonomy that is autonomous ships for the open ocean. They're basically building autonomous ships for the Navy for autonomous delivery of cargo and, military supplies and things. It's just like that is insane. Anyways, it's so cool. All right, Chris, I think you're probably the best one out of the three to break down tough tech in the industries, right? We're talking about some companies as examples. What are the different elements that make up tough tech?
Okay. Let's see. And Lexi, feel free to jump in here since you have lived in the engine for years. Um, gosh. Really tough tech is anything that's addressing sort of a fundamental scientific breakthrough. We normally think of it as things involving chemicals or biological innovation or semiconductor kind of photonics type stuff. Anything that's really cutting edge breakthrough that's going to change the world in a really big way if it makes it. That's kind of how the engine, I think, came up with the term tough tech. But they also have, stuff in quantum, right? So it's not all hardware. As long as it's sort of this fundamental science. The original idea of it, as I understand it, is that MIT realized, hey, there's actually I think the treasurer of MIT who said, we've got all this amazing innovation happening here, at MIT, and there's no real easy pathway for commercialization. There were a couple things that were going on in commercialization back then, but so they actually seeded this fund, the engine, and so it's like anything you can think of coming out of a school like MIT that's going to be groundbreaking in a very difficult sort of scientifically oriented arena. So like I think if you just look at the engine kind of residents and investees, you're talking about anything from green cement to next generation metallic alloys, all kinds of AI for materials, um, you know circularity of recycling, new ways of recycling plastics, all kinds of biological innovations, et cetera. So anything you want to add to that, Lexi?
No, that was beautiful and exactly what I would, well, not probably not exactly, but you covered what I was going to say. I would also add like the biotech piece as well. Like there's a lot of like cell and gene therapy. There's a lot of like medical innovation going on in tough tech as well that um is really cool. Yeah, I think of it as just like disruptors working on like world-changing problems that have to do with science and technology.
Yeah. Alec, anything you'd add to?
No, yeah, I mean, the way I break it down as an investor is just kind of thinking about the type of risk, right? And thinking about there are lots, and maybe most companies out there that are not bringing necessarily novel technology, and the innovation is a business innovation. And tough tech may be everything else, where the risk is engineering and is science, and you're actually doing something that's first of a kind. And those things tend to be challenging and exciting. But you're bringing something new to market.
Yeah. Sticking with you, Alex. So you mentioned, hey, I was in this software world and made the change. So what was it like? Why does tough tech matter to you? Why did you decide to pursue that industry change?
Yeah, it really just comes down to, I think the most important problems, the hardest problems to solve, uh, tend to require, large, difficult, fundamental solutions. And so, most of the companies that I get very excited about investing in, and ultimately, there's no bigger investment than, all of my time as well now in this company, are companies that are, yeah, building challenging, expensive, large solutions that are not trivial and are not proven software technology in another industry already.
That's kind of
And
how I feel too, is like,
yeah,
is sorry to interrupt you, Keith, is it,
I was going to ask you next.
yeah, it adds this sort of excitement to work. I'm just thinking of about like the day to day working in a tough tech company. Like people are coming in every day. Like talk about being out of your depth as like an HR person. Like I have never been around smarter people in my whole life, and that's where I love to be, because literally people are coming in every day inventing things that have never existed before, and so it's just so invigorating and exciting, and it makes it a fun challenge for someone in an operational role like HR, to say like, okay, my job, my mission here is to like make it as easy as possible for these people to do their jobs, and that's like such a clear mission that's really easy to latch onto for like the greater good.
Yeah. Chris, what like you also made the transition from, and I thought that was interesting. All three of you have made this transition. So what was it that was the key element that brought you into this world?
I love nature. It inspires me. And so I've always been really fascinated by any kind of green technology. When I was in college, there wasn't much of a green tech economy. I think there were a few companies, kind of right as I was coming into the workforce that were starting to take off, like SunPower and First Solar, but it just wasn't really much of a thing. I was excited about hydrogen powered cars, way before there was any such thing. And we're still, maybe 25 years later, we're still, waiting for it, right? For the most part, except for maybe the Mirage or whatever. So I was just passionate about it, and I couldn't really find my way, without an engineering degree. So if you have an engineering degree, you've got a huge leg up. It's really easy to get into deep tech or climate tech if you have an engineering or science degree these days. If you don't, then you have to be a little more creative. So that's kind of why I went back to school to get a chemical engineering degree, and then I kind of leveraged a lot of the coursework and knowledge that I gained in that pathway as I got into the actual sector through a kind of more opportunistic career route.
Yeah, I mean, I think what a lot of people here are interested in knowing is like, what is that, the different career paths. So, we're going to talk about the how to get to that position, but what are different, like, what is the typical makeup of these tough tech companies? When I think of software, it's like you've got a software engineering team, you've got product management, marketing, user experience, sales, customer success, and then some type of operating structure. Um, Typical tough tech companies, and I know it's going to vary depending on sector and whatnot, but Lexi, is there general frame of functional areas within these companies, or does it really just vary?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's, the technical side and the non-technical side is the way that it's generally structured, especially like the pre-Series A, pre-commercial organizations that don't really have like a lot of space for non-technical roles. And so when a company's just starting out, you usually have like a super technical CEO founder who probably has a PhD and is doing a lot of the work themselves. And then the people that they start adding first are like the PhD scientists or the mechanical engineers, those types of people. And then as you continue to grow, they're like, okay, all the administrative stuff is really hard. So like, let's hire a chief of staff or an office manager slash HR person. And that's usually one of the first operational, like non-technical roles that comes in. Marketing usually comes in shortly after as they're like starting to think about how they're positioning themselves. And then once you get past Series A, all of those teams are growing, but then you need more people to like manage them. So you have like project managers, product managers coming in, and then building out a commercial team as well. They'll usually bring in like a pretty experienced commercial executive to sort of set the strategy and then start to build out from there, is my experience. I don't know, Chris, you
Yeah,
probably.
Chris, what have you seen? Because
Oh,
it's
yeah,
like,
I think that was a good description. I would just add in, sort of a head of business development or commercialization is usually like pretty early on. It could be from the very beginning. It could be, right as they're coming into prototype development, et cetera. Sometimes they wait till later, but usually, investors want to see commercial traction. And so, either the CEO is really good at getting the commercial traction, in which case they may wait, but even if they are, they still might bring in a head of BD fairly early, and head of sales or whatever you want to call them. And then on the finance side, they'll probably bring in, some kind of head of finance around Series A as well. And they might have a fractional CFO somewhere along the way early on, just to kind of manage all the administrative and financial aspects.
The other thing I would add is early stage companies in tough tech especially rely heavily on interns and co-ops.
mm,
And so that's also a really good way to get in if you're like a technical, if you're a college student getting some sort of a technical degree. Um, Internships are like a really good way for startups to get cheap labor from really smart people early on in their career.
it's well, in this market, it's a win-win because they're getting experience that they need to hopefully land full-time employment or maybe land full-time at that current company.
Yeah.
Um, Alex, how is your company structured?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what Lexi and Chris said is spot on. I mean, at the very early stage, things are very different in tough tech companies than others. It's, you have a bunch of engineers and the bare minimum required to, get them funding and maybe a pilot customer. And typically a CEO, or founder can do all of that. But as you get past Series A, the companies, they need all the other functions, right? Whether it's supply chain that scales first or finance or BD, kind of depends on the skill set of the founders. But you fast forward to a Series B company and there are entire teams that are non-engineering teams. So when I joined the company, it was basically 20 engineers with credit cards. And that was earlier this year. And now we have probably 5 or 6 non-engineers on the team, and we're starting to grow out a supply chain team, and a finance team, and soon a manufacturing team that's a little bit separate from the design engineering. And so, as these companies grow, the concentration of just engineering starts to dilute a little bit. But now we're about 30 people, and maybe 15 of those are engineers, and another 10 are kind of technicians. Both of our founders are engineers, and then we have now, yeah, maybe 5 non-engineers spread across, chief of staff, myself, supply chain. Yeah.
And that group
So
can
which
be
And we
job,
do
insular
lean
and
on
keep you out
fractional
if you're not playing
help
by those rules,
early
even
on,
if you have great
but
ideas,
eventually
even
that
if you
turns into
deserve to
full-time
be
roles.
there.
So we have a
But it's
fractional
just
bookkeeper.
this
Eventually, we'll have a controller.
unwritten set of rules of how we play this
Examples.
game
I think
that need to be
HR is
exposed.
another example where people try and kind of lean on maybe fractional help or outside help until the company's big enough, and then that's going to become an entire department.
And can I jump in on that? Because
yeah, yeah, Chris.
like to answer, I saw Judith's question. I'd love to hear more about getting into the field. And one way to do that is if you have a really marketable skill, like you've been a CFO with other startups, but you want to get into the field, right? It is you can kind of hang your shingle. I'm a fractional CFO, or I'm a fractional, head of HR, chief people officer, or et cetera, fractional chief marketing officer. Those are the most common ones that we see. And I see that being a really common and successful way for people to make a transition where companies are more likely to take a chance on a fractional person that doesn't have the exact background that they need because there aren't as many fractional people, and it's hard to find one that's going to, be willing to do that. Um, and and if it goes well, right, then they see your capabilities and they naturally start wanting more and more of your time until, they get their next round of funding and they give you a full-time job.
And I was gonna like ask, there's different jobs that are kind of like non-negotiable. The engineering component, right? Whether if it's like mechanical engineer, chemical engineer, electrical engineer, like there's all like you need to have that skill set. You need to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But what are the other functional areas? You just talked about some of them, but how desirable is it to have someone with some level of domain experience versus someone that's, like when I think of the finance function, it's like, well, numbers are typically numbers, and that could be any company. But marketing, maybe, do they care about the domain experience as much, or sales, or, operations? How much does that come into play?
I can speak from my experience as an HR person who tries to widen the funnel to create diverse candidate pools as much as possible. It's very frustrating because often tough tech startups care deeply about the domain experience um, because they, again, are inventing something new and they want all of the help that they can get um, from experts. Uh, and the other thing I do see is like, if you have domain expertise in an area that a CEO cares about, they're going to figure out how to get you in. Like even if there's no position posted, they're like, oh my God, I met this person. Like, is there something opportunistically we can do to get them in or draw from their expertise or something like that? So, especially early on, people do find that domain expertise really, really valuable.
Yeah, I think in all of our open roles, robotics and solar, I don't think, well, aside from engineering, I don't think it's a must-have in any of our hires. Obviously, it helps somebody who comes in and understands the market or the type of technology we're working with. But in a supply chain role, we might care more that they've stood up a team from 0 to 1 and have rolled out PLM software, even if it was in a different industry. And I think the same is true for a recruiting role. We care that they have technical recruiting experience, but maybe it doesn't have to be in robotics or clean energy. Those are nice to have, but they're not always a deal breaker if they're missing.
So, what are the core skills that you look for if they're transferring to this industry without that domain experience? Like, what are those common problem-solving skills? Like what are you looking for then, Alec?
Yeah, I mean, I think having worked with engineers is important. Having project management experience and being able to interface with, company leadership because we're such a small company that pretty much any role is going to have to get buy-in from leadership on something that they're working on. And having worked with engineers and understanding kind of the project management and the resourcing that goes into that is super important. And then it depends on the role, whether it's more of an IC role or if it's somebody who's going to stand up a function and lead a team, then we care about whether they've done that before. So it definitely depends on the role. But yeah, there's a number of things that aren't technical that we do care about.
Chris, how about you? Like, 'cause you've seen things as an operator, investor, and as in search. So like, what are those skill sets that people really need that are like the non-negotiables? There's the domain experience, there's the technical stuff, but outside of that,
Yeah, skill sets are going to vary according to the specific type of role, of course, but I'd say more fundamental is an entrepreneurial mindset, right? You need to show that there are all kinds of leaps that you might be having to make, right? If you're trying to get into a tough tech job, right? You might be having to make the leap from a big company to a small company, for example. So if you've ever done anything entrepreneurial in your big company background, that's a huge plus. If the highest growth rate you've ever been exposed to is 10% per year, it's much harder to take the risk on putting you into a startup, right? Where you're trying to get 100%, annual growth rate. So it's about that entrepreneurial mindset. It's about sort of a team orientation, right? We try to one of the things we try to look out for is sort of a me first orientation. In a startup, it's sort of all hands on deck, and it's like a basketball team. Like you don't want the guy who's always just making the baskets by themselves, right? Not that I'm a basketball expert by any stretch. I'm kind of going on a limb here, but it's really about the team, like working together, right? Um, so those are the fundamentals, and being smart, being hardworking, being organized, like all those things matter. Taking a lot of initiative, demonstrating all that. And I want to be honest, as a recruiting firm, we are very much focused on people who have the industry experience already. Like we go for those people first, right? That's kind of what they pay us for because it's harder to find those people. But if you have the other stuff, you have the motivation and you have the track record of success, right? In some way, shape, or form, then you should be able to network your way in. You should be able to kind of part-time your way in, or advise your way in, or volunteer your way in, or start lower, maybe, start at a lower position and work your way up to prove your worth.
Okay, so a couple great questions. And in markets like this where it's a little challenging, it's very challenging. Fractional's a real possibility. And I see a lot of very senior people like, hey, I'm doing fractional work. But the questions that people propose, like, where do I even find fractional work other than, hey, I'm highly networked? But if you're just trying to branch into this industry, you're probably not well networked. So how do you even find these fractional roles? And at what level do they tend to look for fractional, experience for the C-suite or the VP? So, Lexi, what do you see?
Yeah. Uh, so I can talk a little bit about my experience with this. Just for transparency, I'm 31. I left Kitepin, my last role, at a director level. And now I'm consulting, I would say, at a roughly director to VP level, depending on the client. Um, but people were coming to me when I was at Kitepin looking for fractional support in standing up an HR function, which I've done 3 times. I had done 3 times at that point. And so I think that was a really good opportunity for me. I still sort of consider myself relatively early career, maybe early to mid. And I sort of get those requests mostly because I'm less expensive than a CXO, CHRO, CPO type of thing. I will say it's the difficulty there is you have to be willing to not um, have a full-time job or to work outside of your full-time job, um, which
And benefits, right? You're not going to
really
have benefits,
difficult.
right?
Yeah, you're not earning a full salary, you're not earning benefits. Sometimes they'll give you equity, but that doesn't pay rent. And so I think that's sort of the hardest part. But if you can sort of creatively figure out like, oh, my full-time job lets me moonlight, as long as it's not, a direct competitor, that could be a really good way to just get some hours in, earn some extra cash, and build up that portfolio of tough tech advising or fractional support, which is what I've done in the past. Um, but my take on this is like, it doesn't really matter what your seniority level is. You just have to be able to be really clear about what value you can add to them from day one. They're just looking for value and bang for their buck. So if you're able to articulate that by understanding what their challenges might be and like being really clear about what skills you have that can solve those challenges, then you have a shot at fractional support for a tough tech startup is my take.
Okay. And but how do you even find these roles? Like, how do you network your way into these types of positions? Like
Get
Chris or
to know
Alec,
recruiters.
right?
Yeah.
I'd say, it tends to be people who are in between roles and they say, okay, I'm looking for full-time roles, but I'm open to fractional roles. And they might put it on their LinkedIn, like, oh, open to fractional roles or something. And then it's really about networking. I mean, everything is networking, right? Especially when it comes to your career. If you, for example, like if you know someone who landed a job at a company that you want to work for, you have a huge leg up, right? You should be taking that person to lunch like every couple of months, right? And if you read that book, Never Eat Alone, just always be meeting with people that you know and putting the word out that you're available. and learning more about the industry, going to events, meeting people at events. If you're not well networked in the sector that you want to be in, your first job is to become well networked, and that means going to every event you can afford to go to.
And a lot of
Uh,
them are free. I mean,
yeah.
like New York Climate Week, San Francisco Climate Week, there's Deep Tech Weeks. A lot of those events are free and they're put on by sponsors. And you can go and be in a room full of a bunch of operators and investors and vendors and have conversations that lead to things. I think thinking about it in terms of those aggregators, recruiters and investors, that can kind of help you start building that list that you then want to go network and outreach with. There are funds that have lists of their portfolios on their websites that invest exclusively in tough tech or deep tech or whatever you want to call it. And you can go download that list of their companies, and sometimes they even aggregate job boards for their portfolios, and that can be a great place to start. And even if something isn't listed as fractional, you can look at a job board and get a good sense of what a company's struggling with and where you might be able to come in and add value. Because keep in mind, early stage startups are very chaotic places. And just because there isn't a strict job description listed for exactly what you can bring to the table doesn't mean that they don't need your help.
So hypothetically, let's say some hard tech company's looking for a head of marketing, and you can tell it's early stage because they're calling it head of marketing because it's probably not like the C level yet, maybe VP director, who knows, depends. Um, do you approach the founder of the company to offer, hey, been in this, I've done this job before, but not in this industry, and I'm willing to learn and do something fractional? Is that the best inroad? And if you have a connection into that person, obviously that would be preferred. But if you don't, is it okay to go cold to the founder? Is that where you should start, or should you start elsewhere?
Your hit rate's going to be very low. But if there's a lot of companies you're interested in, sending emails to founders, heads of operations, chief of staff, like the folks at these companies, if they don't have somebody in a recruiting function, again, pretty low hit rate for cold emails. So absolutely work for a warm intro if you can. But you send 100 of those emails out and you will get a non-zero number of replies.
I also wonder too, like I obviously have never looked for a technical role, but I imagine if you're an engineer or a scientist who can bring like a really valuable skill set, reaching out to a technical leader in those organizations who's probably understaffed and has been asking for more staff for many months might be a really good inroad, because then they can like go present it to the CEO with something like actually tangible. I don't know, just a thought.
So cool to just do the blind outreach, maybe on LinkedIn, or figure out the email structure of the company.
Yeah.
I would vote against that personally because I think it's demoralizing. Like, Alec, you're probably right. You probably would get a response if you sent out 100, but how many people are actually going to send out 100, connection requests after they get rejected or ignored after the first 20? People kind of get demoralized. So I would say focus on your network, focus on the people you know, and going to events where you can meet people face to face, and it's just relaxed and casual and easy, and there's no like feeling of isolation and desolation out there when but that'd be my suggestion, would be a better use of your effort.
Mm.
You should follow the people that you are interested in, and look for connections, look for introductions. It'd be a lot more gratifying probably.
Yeah, and Chris, you mentioned never eat alone, right? Not never search alone, or which one did you mention? Because
I would never eat alone. I didn't
yeah,
know. I had
so
never searched.
that book is amazing. I listened to it over the summer. I'm an audiobook guy, and immediately had both my kids in college. Like, you need to understand this book, and it's so powerful in terms of how to network. And that's your connections are your goal. So get out there and meet people face to face. Go to events, like Alex said. A lot of these events are free. That's how you start to build inroads into these events. The other thing that has been super useful, I've gotten great feedback from, if people haven't heard of it already, it's Never Search Alone. So Phil Terry's the founder of this. It's a nonprofit. It's all volunteer based, and they create these search councils. And it kind of goes along the lines of what you were saying, Chris, where it's like you create, I forget the title. It's almost like your ideal customer profile, but it's like your ideal job profile. So you basically create a narrow, instead of boiling the ocean and just reaching out to 100 people, you kind of go very targeted. So it's kind of like more what Chris was saying. So you can join these search councils. So I'll put the link in here. You know, I do think they kind of randomize who you're meeting with, but it's all supportive. And if anyone knows Lenny's podcast, he's like the product management guru of all product management gurus. He had Phil on his podcast. It was such a great episode. So I would definitely recommend that too. So, anyways, hopefully those are some broader tips regardless of industry to help you out. Um, Now, what success have you seen of people making that transition? Are there specific examples like, oh, I remember, the three of you did, right? So your three examples. But if there's other people that you would be like, oh, I remember so and so, like I mentioned Jason Jacobs, what he did. Like, what examples would you have of people successfully making this transition?
You're asking any of us, right?
I kept it open, but I would think you would know, Chris.
Oh, okay, so that's fine. I mean, gosh, I don't want to repeat myself, but I think it is about networking and getting out there and meeting people and learning as much as you can, right? I had a really good friend who, was a mechanical engineering guy he got his design master's from Stanford, and he was making like ice cream machines, etc. And he really wanted to get involved in climate, so he went and just created a program for himself where he just read everything he could find about climate for like 6 weeks and really became knowledgeable. So then when he would go to events and network, et cetera, he actually had something to talk about, something to offer, right? So it's not that hard to come up to speed on a new sector. If you probably put in 10 or 20 hours, you're already, halfway there. So that would be one suggestion. Um, and of course, it depends on the specifics. So anyone who's on the call, like, if you want to put in any more details about like, I'm coming from a marketing background or a finance background in, paper goods, how could I get in? And then if you have ideas about which sector you want to get into, like, are you interested in nuclear power or, space technology or, photonics or, energy storage systems. So if you have any specifics you want to throw it in the chat, then we can kind of tailor the our direction for you, because it really does depend. You want to leverage your existing background as much as you can and learn as much about where you want to end up, and then try to find the connections, right? Find the people and the events and the companies that are kind of networked in the area that you want to end up in, and start working those connections, whether it's educating yourself or spending time with people or conferences, etc.
I'll
And
add on to that really quickly. Sorry to interrupt you, Keith.
that's all right.
My dad is the CFO at Envio, um, and they're a climate tech, like ag tech company. And he I mean, he's had a really obviously a long career, but like worked up the ranks from public accounting and was in like a million different types of industries. And this is his first foray into ag tech, which I don't know if you would consider that tough tech. I kind of do. But he did similar to what you were saying, Chris, is he just educates him, like numbers are numbers, but he was able to educate himself really deeply about the industry and what the challenges might be. And then the other piece I would add to that is he is an executive that has experience rolling up his sleeves and being super hands-on and doing all of the stuff that he's not going to have a team necessarily to do, even at least for the first couple of years. And so he's also been able to market himself in that way when he's networking and talking to folks and job searching, by saying like I'm a player coach, right? Like I'm willing to get in the weeds, and I also am able to sit at your board meeting and like give the high level. And so he's been able to sort of like, yeah, leverage his strengths, get really knowledgeable on the industry, and then also be willing to sort of do some of the dirty work, which is you know apparently his company found really attractive because he's working there.
Well, I I think we have an opportunity to do a live individual. One of our attendees is providing some information about their background. So real consulting on the fly here. So Judith says, I'm coming from climate reporting and consulting in the corporate world. mid-career, want to serve climate tech suggestions. Was a professional services founder very early in my career. So when I read that real quick, I'm like, sounds like she's got a shot. She's not like completely outside the world. So obviously, we want to know more about the climate reporting that she was doing, but what advice would you have for Judith?
Yeah, I want to know what kind of professional services, Judith, because you want to leverage that, whatever it was. So if you were doing sustainability consulting itself, um, then I would say my first thought is, well, I probably have you check out the world of, carbon capture, right? Unfortunately, that sector is taking a beating right now in a really big way with the Trump administration headwinds, et cetera. But it'll be back, you should start, planting your seeds now for when it does make its comeback. There are all these companies, like actually I just saw today, this is not one of our clients, unfortunately yet, but Arca just got 300,000, a 300,000 ton order, a carbon ton order from Microsoft today. Microsoft's still going. They've got their climate pledge, and despite, the headwinds, they're still buying. And there are these various technology companies that are involved with capturing carbon, right? And corporates, right? Where you're coming from corporates, and there's all this sustainability reporting on carbon credits, it's a carbon footprint, et cetera. There's probably a job in there somewhere for you. It could be, policy or BD or something like that.
Yeah, not just leveraging that experience, but leveraging the actual projects and connections that you may have worked on. If you're reaching out to a company that you want to work for, and you say, well, in my prior role, I actually consulted for one of your customers or one of the companies that's on the list of customers you'd like to target, that can definitely catch attention. If a BD team is being built out, and you have experience with the market that the company is going after, that's a really attractive thing to have on your resume, that others might not. So thinking about, who did I consult for? Who are their other companies or companies that are trying to pitch to them, and going after those may be an interesting avenue.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Alec. And I would even segue that to say, okay, let's say you've exhausted all of your carbon capture climate tech opportunities because it's kind of a depressed subsector right now. Well, what about all the other climate tech companies that are also kind of thinking about carbon credits in their future, right? Or maybe even in near term. You could potentially interface with them, offer an hour of free consulting to have them think about their corporate strategy, right? On how they're going to engage with corporates to further the corporate sustainability goals by potentially becoming a customer or partner with the early stage company's technology, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
And Judah shared her LinkedIn so you guys can do a deeper dive if there's any next layer. Like I think Chris, you were totally on target with her background. So you like a good recruiter, you knew immediately. So
All right, who's
uh
next? Who's next? What's up?
so what as an extension of that, like what companies come to mind? Like there's a lot of people here from Boston. Are there Boston companies that you're like, wow, they just raised, they're building something really cool. They're at that scale level where they'll probably be looking for people either fractional or transferable skills in different functional areas that we already talked about. I think of like Commonwealth Fusion Systems, they've raised like
Billions.
a lot, billions, right? Billions. So that's like, I mean, what
Three
they're
billion.
doing
Yeah.
is, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
So a company like that, do you think, we don't have to go through their specific careers, but a company like that would be logical to target, right? Because they're probably building finance, they're building marketing, go to market, like they got to build everything.
Yeah. Actually, you can go on LinkedIn. I don't know if I think you have to have a paid account to do this, but you can go on LinkedIn. You can click on a company if you think they're interesting. You click on insights, and you can see if their employee count is going up, flat, or down. And if they're going up, that's a great company to reach out to.
You
I
know,
can just follow up.
that's a good nugget that I don't think people ever, I don't know if the paid account thing, but if it's not, that's a nice little hack that I don't know if people really know about.
Yeah.
But you never know. I mean, even after a layoff, sometimes they still need to hire a key position. I wouldn't recommend going into a company that's kind of going downhill because that's probably not good for your career. But
Right.
anytime a company just raised a whole bunch of money, right? Like who's raised lots of money recently? Like, Group 14 just raised whatever 450 million or something, a billion, 450 million in the energy storage space, or um, you know, just go on LinkedIn and follow all the companies that you think you might be interested in, and read your LinkedIn posts every day, and you'll see who's raising money. Um,
And then to find the companies that are raising capital, uh, so there's two emails that I subscribe to. One is Axios Term Rata, and then or Pro Rata, I mean, not term. And then there's another one from Fortune that's called Term Sheet. So this is Pro Rata. And what you'll get is, I mean, you can subscribe to both of them. I do, but they're basically repetitive. And it's just a roll up of all the funding activity across all sectors. It's not just clean tech or biotech or software. It's everything. So it's everywhere. It's not just Boston. It's so these are where you see companies raising, how much did they raise, by who, and you can start to see some patterns of sectors that are getting capital. They're the hot sector. What firms are funding those companies? And those firms sometimes have a job board on their own firm website that aggregates all their portfolio company jobs that you can sign up for an email list there, or you can just comb through their listings from there. So um, I think the common thread of what everyone's talking about is just get in the weeds. Like if there's something that you're excited about, deeply interested in, you just got to sink your teeth into the knowledge, listen to podcasts. There's so much information out there that you have access to. Start going to events, meet people. Um, so, anyways, does anyone like I went on a tangent. So, but
That's
anyone else
okay.
have?
I threw on Latitude Media
Okay,
onto the list. They used to be, well, I don't know if they used to be, but the same people I think who used to do Green Tech Media started Latitude Media, right? I could be wrong on that, but it's a good site, and there are probably a few others, that are good to follow. And any company that you see mentioned in Latitude Media, if it's a positive article, like that's a good thing, right? Or if you're interested in nuclear fusion or next generation nuclear fission, find podcast associations, et cetera, and follow them, and just watch who they're talking about. Those are the hot companies.
are there resources like emails that have just hard tech jobs, like, or websites? Like Venture Fizz is mainly software, AI, cloud for Boston and New York. Like, so we're very specialized. Is there other resources, website, emails, anything that would have that sector for jobs?
Thinking about climate specifically, there's a couple of fantastic Slack channels actually. MCJ has one. Let's see, what are some of the other ones? Um, let's see, I've got a list here. New Energy Network, which I think used to be New Energy Nexus, Work on Climate. They all have job boards in there, and they all also have great channels where it's a very collaborative environment. You can post in there and ask for advice on something or ask for an intro to somebody. Not I think at least two of those three are public that you can just join.
I
Yeah.
think a lot of maybe some of the aggregators have like job boards or things like Flagship has a job board and like a pretty robust website and blog. I'm sure the Engine does too. Yeah, the Engine is a job board. Those are good ways to get info as well.
Yeah. So
You
just
see
get into the weeds.
Charlie's post there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Charlie's adding a ton of value. He should have been one of the panelists. He knows a lot of all the
Yeah.
resources.
Oh
And
yeah,
I
Charlie.
didn't know disciplined entrepreneurship was going to have an edition for climate tech. I learned something there too. That's an amazing book. Um, what else should people know? What other resources or like organizations? Are there, different groups? The Slack communities are great, but are there, the Boston Climate Tech Group type of stuff, or the global something that I should sink my teeth into?
Gosh, there's so many, but I think start. Which we're talking about green tech. Start with the climate week, and if you are interested in tough tech, try to figure out which sectors, right? Because you know getting into quantum and getting into nuclear fusion are and getting into biotech are completely different. Like they're bunched together in certain ways, right, under the, accelerator umbrella, or the sort of sometimes, there are a lot of venture funds that will invest across those types of sectors. But from a career perspective, you want to become an expert in the sectors that are of interest to you as much as you can, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would start there. Yeah. But did you see
Okay.
Charlie's request there about his own personal background? Um, Used to do strategy consulting for large philanthropies and impact investors,
Yes.
that to investor engagement roles. Um, Alec, you might have a good one on this, but my first thought is just, yes, sounds great. If you're good at making PowerPoints, there's a lot of startups out there that need help in making decks. And if you can, if you have any investor relations, or you're good at interfacing with investors, then yeah, start reaching out to startups and going to conferences and meeting early stage founders that don't know what they're doing with investment, and, offer to help for equity to start, just give me 1% of your company, or 0.5%, or use an advisory agreement, and get involved.
Mhm.
His background speaks very chief of staff too, right? Isn't that the type of strategy consulting background that done a
Yeah.
lot like strategy consulting, impact investors, multi-year AI, emerging tech ventures? Like actually, Jeff Busgang from Flybridge had a post on LinkedIn today that talked about every company needs a chief of staff and kind of talked about the background and the experience. So I'll put that in here too.
Yeah. And
Um,
project management skills, I mean, like are so crucial. Again, I think it was Chris who was saying, most of the founders of these companies are engineers, or Lexi, you're saying most of them PhDs, right? They're focused on the science, they're focused on the engineering. They're not management consultants. They may not know how to put together a Gantt chart. There's a lot of just chaos into order that needs to happen at these companies. And man, the chief of staff role is such a great one to land in if you can. And then from there, you can grow into whatever you discover there's aptitude for, the company needs. Not always easy to land those roles, but it is kind of, often the first generalist role at an otherwise technical company. So definitely worth jumping into. Um, yeah.
I totally agree. And a chief of staff can be anything. It's a catch-all, right? So, their chief of staffs could get hired for, 140K, and chief of staffs that get hired for 300K. Where it almost becomes like a COO. Like sometimes we're doing a chief of staff search, and some of the candidates get considered for COO instead because they're so senior, right?
Mhm.
yeah.
And
Any
some of them are just looking for a glorified EA. So make sure you read the job
Right.
description really closely
Exactly.
before you apply.
Figure out how much headroom there is, right?
Yeah.
Any like last, so Charlie actually had a question way before about for students, like they're still finding their way. Like any advice for students trying to land in this industry where they don't have that experience to back up the value yet, but are trying to get
Yeah,
into that
so there's
industry?
a ton of like intern specific grants, especially in the state of Massachusetts. I'm working with like the Mass CEC right now, and I can't think of what the acronym stands for, but it's climate related, where they offer grants for the fall semester and the spring semester for companies to bring on interns. So you can apply, like they post directly on their websites, and then you can apply as an intern for these companies looking for engineers, scientists, et cetera. The one for life sciences is like Mass Life Sciences, MLCSC, I think it is. I forget the exact what it means, but they're very similar. They offer grants for paid internships. So that's how most of the organizations that I've consulted for find interns, is through those opportunities. And then of course, like if you're in a school such as Northeastern that has partnerships with organizations for co-ops and that sort of thing, like really leverage your university's career office, because they often will have like funnels into these types of startup companies, that like we as the companies trust them to give us quality people. So if you kind of go through them, you'll have a sort of a better shot.
Well, we're already at time, which is crazy. If anyone wants to put their LinkedIn in real quick, I'm happy. I just put mine in there to connect. And it flew by. Like that hour just like flew by, and I learned so much. Lexi, Chris, Alec, thank you so much for walking us through all those details of tough tech and the journey in. And I think the upshot is anything's possible, right? And if you sink your teeth into the industry, get to know the players, the investors, the companies, absorb yourself, it's just a matter of time before you land that journey. So, I'm going to leave on a very positive note that, hey, make it happen, but it's going to take some effort.